Hi, and welcome to another episode of Engaged in Conversation. Today, we're trying something slightly new. We have a slightly different format. I'm joined by two fantastic guests. We'll introduce them in a minute, but also we're in a different location. We've moved away from our studio green screen to something a little bit more relaxed and real world. So let's see how that works today. So I'd just like to introduce Advita Patel and Jürgen Maier. Would you like to say hello and introduce yourselves?
Hello. I'm really pleased to be here today and listen to the conversations we're going to have with each other, because we've got some great topics to discuss, haven't we, today?
We have.
So I own a consultancy called Comms Rebel. It is an employee experience and internal communications consultancy. And I also am the co-founder of A Leader Like Me, which is an organisation to help support underrepresented women of colour to progress in their careers. But we also work with organisations to help them cultivate more inclusive cultures.
Fantastic. Well, also brilliant to be here and join this conversation. I'm Jürgen Maier, and I'm the co-founder of an organisation called vocL, which is a platform for encouraging socially responsible business voices. And we're particularly focused on next generation leaders and making sure that next generation leaders can be more responsible in terms of their business, being responsible to society, and also being more vocal and communicating that which is your expertise and your expertise, Advita and Phil. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way, just to finish the intro. So we've effectively, I think, got three experts in communications here today, coming from very different backgrounds and areas of expertise. And hopefully we can have a fruitful conversation. I think particularly zoning in on something that is very topical and very interesting for many boardrooms through the land, which is about how we can create inclusive cultures within business and make those flourish. So should we start talking about that?
Big question.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's a big challenge.
It is a big challenge. And Priya, who is my co-founder of A Leader Like Me, we recognised and realised when we worked with clients and organisations that there's just a lot of confusion and conflict, I would say, around inclusive cultures and what does that actually mean. And often it gets interchangeable with diversity, and people mix up diversity and inclusion and don't really understand the differences. And the way I look at inclusion, will be really interesting to hear your points of view. It's all about making sure that people can thrive in the work that they're doing and bring their best self to be able to do that in whatever that best self looks like. So there's this whole discussion right now around bring your whole self to work. You know, be authentic and bring your authentic self to work. But my question always to leaders is it safe enough for them to do that? You know, if you're asking people to bring their whole self, are you making sure that the environment is set up for them to thrive in that space? So let's talk about what do we need to create right now for them to bring who they need to be to do the work that they have to do.
Yeah. I mean, a thing that's really fascinating me, but building on what you're saying is, you know, as we all as companies started the journey of diversity and inclusion, I think initially it was very much about what do the teams that we're assembling look like? Yeah. And the focus was on we need mixes of gender. Yeah. We need people of different ethnic backgrounds. And look, that's been great. I think we've made progress in many companies in that regard, haven't we? But what we've now realized is well, actually, it's about the diversity of thought that goes along with that. You know, so actually, you can present a very diverse group of people, but they've all had very similar experiences. And indeed, I don't want to get too political here, but if you take our current cabinet that has just been assembled by our Prime Minister, it looks massively diverse, doesn't it? It's probably the most diverse cabinet we've ever seen, which is sort of like, hurrah, this is fantastic, proud to have a country with such a diverse leadership. But actually, when you then look at the backgrounds, a lot of them are incredibly similar. And I sort of wonder whether that is, why we're currently seeing a bit of U-turning and a bit of not listening to our country, because there isn't really that proper diversity.
Yeah. Diversity of thought is really interesting because it is a debatable topic. And in my experience, a lot of folks have hidden behind diversity of thought to excuse the fact they don't have representation on their boards and senior management. There's definitely progress. I think you're right, Jürgen. I think progress has been made in some organisations, but we're still finding challenge at senior boards and CEO boards and even non-executive director positions. We're still not seeing that representation. And when questioned about why we're not seeing that representation, diversity of thought is brought up quite frequently to say, well, we've got diversity of thought or cognitive diversity, as some folks say, which is incredibly important to your point. But I also feel like there are some organisations that may hide behind that as an excuse why they don't have that representation. And I always say, why do you believe that certain ethnic minorities or certain genders or whatever don't have the experience? And if you don't feel like they've got the experience, what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
Because we don't all have the same opportunities. And I think there's also this fear around bringing different thought to the table.
So that's really, so this is a really interesting point, isn't it? So you've got, on the one hand, you could assemble a team that looks massively diverse, but has got no diversity of thought. On the other hand, you could have organisations that are hiding behind having that, that sort of visible diversity, saying, well, actually, we're all white men, but we have, different diversity of thought. So I mean, we're now getting into really quite a difficult. If you take me and Phil, I mean, we're both middle-aged-ish. Phil's a bit younger than me. Phil's a bit younger than me, so sorry if I've just insulted you.
No, yeah, I'm definitely middle-aged at least.
But I mean, we're so let's say we're middle-aged, white men, but I belong to the gay community, which I mean, the audience listening here wouldn't immediately see. We'll have had very different educational backgrounds. We'll have had different family experiences because growing up as a gay man is different to a family man with your 3 children, etc., etc. So it's fascinating. So how do we?
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I've seen the idea of a shadow board. Is that something you ever did in Siemens, where you could almost have the main board with all of these challenges, but then also a shadow board, often the younger generation? And what I love with what you're doing at vocL is you're very much trying to foster authenticity and clearer comms at that business leadership level, but also now with a lens to fostering that through the next generation. And that's really fascinating that you're doing that so successfully.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the answer to your question is I did do it at Siemens, but it wasn't sort of a formal shadow board. That wasn't sort of the trendy thing then. But, we did assemble a group of our top talent, which was incredibly representative of different backgrounds. And they became our sounding board, really, on specific initiatives that we were rolling out, particularly, for example, how do we create a more digital and a more agile organization? I mean, look, you need next generation people to advise you on that. We weren't exactly the experts. So, and I found that massively important and interesting. And at vocL, what's interesting is we've started with a bit of a more traditional sort of, the voices of experience, and we're now creating a cohort of our future voices. And actually, it's beginning already to be quite interesting. The difference, dynamic. The dynamic and the difference of opinion on certain topics. And I think that's what's going to make vocL, very exciting and spark a little bit, actually. Yeah,
I agree. And I think when we first met was at your amazing conference. I mean, I don't think anyone could believe that was the first conference that you'd done.
I know.
It was, wasn't it?
I know. I don't think I could believe it, to be honest.
And I think, that's what was really enlightening and intriguing, was that the way you did that was impressive, but also the audience and the speakers that you had were very, very representative, weren't they?
Yeah.
To a point that it really made you think of the average event or the average company scenario wasn't as inclusive as the event that you laid on. And I think you really showcased how you should or could or can do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's about being intentional. And that the whole purpose of my event is intention. And I think we live in such a busy world with so much distraction, lots of things going on, that it's easier to make decisions just quickly without much thought, because we're just, and there are things that are happening, and I completely appreciate that some people don't have the luxury of time sometimes. But if you're going to do something, then do it properly and put intention behind it. And when I decided that I wanted to do in a Rebel conference, it was actually born out of frustration for going along to these events where it was the same echo chamber, information bubble, people saying the same thing over and over again, the same voices on stage. There was no cognitive diversity. You know, you may have so you kind of, I'm saying this very controversial, I suppose, in a way, is that it is tick boxy. You know, so people will look at a panel and go, okay, I need a black woman, I need a gay man, I need to have white people on there because of representation. You know, we can't exclude. And that's their mind process, rather than thinking, actually, what do I need to get out of this conversation? And how do I find those people who can represent properly? And people say to me, oh, well, there just isn't a talent out there in this space that are diverse. And I'm like, nonsense. Which is why I created the underrepresented speaker list. And the underrepresented speaker list is for anybody who believes that they're not represented. So I don't give people a label. I don't say you have to be a person of colour to be on this list, or you have to be a woman to be on this list. I'm like, if you feel you are not represented in any way, get your name on that list so we can get your thoughts out there.
It's a great idea, and I saw a LinkedIn post where it was trending because someone was organising an event, and I think it was 9 speakers. I think 8 of them were white male, and there was one lady, and it was gay. Someone commented, "Oh, this isn't very diverse or inclusive," and then it went viral because of all the comments, rightly so. And you were very positive and said, look, if you need some help, check this list out. And it was your list of underrepresented audiences and people. And I thought that was really nice but isn't it shocking that's still happening in 2022, that a big company would host an event without even thinking? That's the thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm wondering, actually, you know, you've just made me think, you know, all events, we always end up with these really boring biographies of everybody, don't you? You know, and it's not like it's the CV, you know, has been this, has been that. You know, I'm wondering whether you should just change that, and that should be about your diverse experience, you know, and to bring out that point, you know, because take that panel. Look, I think in terms of a look, it looks completely wrong to have a panel of 8 white men and 1 woman. However, you know, it may well be.
It could be more diverse.
You know, I mean, you know, 3 of those could have been gay men. You know, they could have had incredibly different backgrounds. You know, and if you present that and say, look, you know, here is our diversity of thought, you know, then you know, maybe it's okay, as long as it doesn't become an excuse.
And it's about representation, right? So I always say to folks, who are your audience? Who are the publics that you're working towards, and what are you trying to say to them? And are you representing those publics? And that's about fair representation. So if you're talking to you know, we're privileged enough to live in a country which is very, very diverse, and, you know, and has lots of different characters, and it's brilliant in terms of what we have access to. And if your company they're your customers, which often they are, then are you representing those customers in the conversations that you're having about those customers? And if you're not, then you may need to reflect and think, how are we bringing those conversations out with different voices and thoughts? Which is why the representative list works, because to your point, Jürgen, nobody wants to hear a list of your CV. I always say to folks, go on LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn. If you want to know my history and my experience, go on LinkedIn. And we asked all our speakers at Inner Rebel to have a sentence about what does unleashing your inner rebel mean to you. And that's, I mean, we didn't bore people with a CV on stage, and if people want to know more, we gave everyone a booklet with a description about what each person does. And you have to think differently if you want to make change happen.
Fantastic. I'm going to go and change I'm going to change my biography.
Good.
I think that's a really good idea.
Immediately after this.
It was June the 14th, so we're doing it again in 2023. So a little plug there if you want to come along.
Yeah, no, I'd love
and I
to be
think
there.
what fascinates and drives me and our business at Engage is using technology to give people a voice, because ultimately, if you're underrepresented or you don't feel included in something, if you have a voice, and that's where social media has worked well, hasn't it? Because ultimately everybody can go on Facebook and say something, or Twitter, and in a way it has given a level playing field for people to be heard. And I think the challenge is, how do we kind of try and echo that sentiment in business environments to sort of level up that playing field a bit more, rather than that classic sort of top-down corporate cultures that often still exist even now.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's something I'd be interested in exploring just quickly with both of you. Is, you know, I'm fascinated by the fact that business is staying very quiet about some very significant events. We're definitely seeing, not exactly enthusiasm towards our journey towards a sustainable Britain and a sustainable world. And indeed, we're getting silly announcements like we're going to start fracking again, and and all this sort of, where is the business voice in that? And then, there was just this little mini budget, where, it was just optically all wrong, sort of give a bit more money to the rich, and whilst we've got a cost of living crisis going on. And I just sort of think, look, responsible business. And in the end, of the 45% tax rate, has been reintroduced, which I personally think is the right thing to do. But, where was business shouting about that? And so, for both of you, Advita, why is that? And what is it about companies that are better at communicating this sort of thing out in the public domain?
I think it's confidence. I think a lot of the time, a lot of leaders may lack that in that space because they are fearful of being called out for having an opinion. And as great as social media is and how it's opened up the avenues for lots of people, including marginalised and underrepresented folk, it's also a very toxic place at times. And I think a lot of leaders, and there's no context either on some of these platforms. So I think a lot of leaders are fearful potentially of calling it out or speaking up about certain things, and they may have an opinion that's not as thought through as they would like, and they may not have the advisors around them to give them that confidence or courage to speak up as well. And the ones, the folks who do speak up and do appear on Sky and BBC and Question Time, the difference I see with them is that they've got an incredibly supportive communications team around them,
right,
who will allow them to explore their thoughts and will give them the support they need to be able to do this, and are not probably too scared about what that leader is going to say, and can manage that crisis or that reputation. And great media training and that kind of support can help boost that courage. But I do think that a lot of leaders are waiting for direction from places like CBI, maybe the IOD, the Institute of Directors as well, don't know what to say. And if they do have it, and I'm 100% convinced they all have a view and an opinion, but are scared about if they do go out there and say this, what are people going to say about them?
Yeah, and also, I mean, CBI, and by the way, I've been having a chat with CBI in the background on this and saying, why haven't you been,
more vocal about it?
More vocal about this. And of course, CBI always has a bit of a tightrope to tread, don't they? You need to continue good respectful relationships with government. At the same time, you want to be able to call out, where you don't agree or where you think, these policies will have a negative impact, particularly on society. But anyway, the CBI, took quite a positive view of the budget. And then I guess what that means is then a lot of business people, well, if that's what the CBI thinks, then I better not.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, we're all grown-ups, why can't you just say, well, actually, I'm a business leader and I see it a little bit different, why are people...
I think we've just lost the skill of productive disagreement, Jürgen. I think it's either we're right or wrong, and there's debate and arguments all the time.
That's culturally a thing now in society, isn't it, generally, not just in business. Definitely.
We're unable to have powerful conversations without wanting to win. And I think this tolerance is not as great as it used to be. I think there's lots of misinformation that's been spread, so people are conflicted with what they're reading. I think there's a lot of tension in lots of the conversations. There's been, since Brexit, a lot of disconnect with your own peers. Brexit was 50-50 ultimately, and that was portrayed in organisations, and I saw conflict in organisations where people had voted either way, between themselves, and they just can't have powerful conversations with productive disagreements and come to an outcome that's useful and a learning experience. I think we all enter conversations to want to win, and that puts the fear in people. Like, do you know what? If CBI have said this, then should I be conflicted against them? Because to your point, you need to build and maintain those relationships with those voices out there, especially when you're lobbying the government for various things and you're doing certain, you don't want to be seen as, what if I don't get invited in that space? And it all goes back down again to belonging. If I don't belong in this space, You know, will I be excluded from the conversations? Will my business not thrive? Will I not attract the talent that I want? So I need to kind of toe the line here a little bit, which is why you need that community and confidence of people around you. And the work that you're doing at vocL, empowering those individuals, the voices who are coming in, who are going to be future leaders and CEOs of organizations, and giving them the skills and the confidence and the support from now. So when they get to that point, they can say, actually, I can go and speak on Question Time or BBC News or Sky News and do a statement around this because I believe in this and this is why I believe in it. But we just don't have that right now, sadly.
It's having more authenticity of voice, isn't it? Often in these scenarios, if you have that, then you're in a better place.
You know, how long do you think it'll be, or will we get there where, you know, a platform like vocL or any of the other engagement platforms that you've created for customers and for, you know, NGOs and other organizations, at what point will some of those platforms become the place where people, you know, engage in conversation? And I love your term, you productive disagreement. I've not used that. I love
really
that,
good.
productive disagreement. You know, at what point will though, you know, so will it be on a vocL, on another engage, as opposed to on Sky News and whatever? I mean, I think it would be fantastic if it could, but are we going to get there, do you think?
I think we could, and I think there's appetite in people like yourself that feel like we need to create that. I mean, we've even seen that, I suppose, with Trump, haven't we? Because he was excluded from mainstream social media, and now he's built his own because he firmly believes he needs to have a voice. And there's that whole debate within mainstream as well. But
is there not an echo chamber risk there? Because I mean, I've not been on Trump's platform. By the way, when he first talked about it, he said he was going to call it vocL, and I thought,
really?
We've spent all our time branding up vocL. We're going to have to change it. But you know, look, I've not been on it, but I can imagine. You know, it is a pretty, you know, right wing. You know, look, I mean, people with their, you know, views that I will productively disagree with, but you know, valid views that they hold there. But you want a platform that holds all the views. You know, we don't want 5 platforms where everybody's got their own echo chamber. I mean, that's pretty useless, isn't it?
But that's the thing with social media, though, isn't it? Because the algorithms drive that echo chamber. And that's why I think a lot of people believe what they believe. And that's what I find when I'm having conversations with individuals and I say, where did you get that insight from? Where have you formed that opinion from? Oh, on Twitter. Like, let's look at your follower list. Like, who are you following? Because that's what social media loves. They love the algorithms and they want to keep you on there for as long as they possibly can. So they find the people who agree with your viewpoints because they look at your search history and you follow them. And this is the basics that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
And you have to really explain that to them and go, you do realize that you are only seeing things that they want you to see because the algorithms encourage you to follow the people who've got the same thinking as you. Because if there was too much of disengagement, and the only time you get that disengagement or productive disagreements is when something's gone viral and you're like, oh, what's this? And that's what fighting and all that in a debate brings. But that's social media, let's be honest, is a business. As much as it's helped people have voices, it's a business, and it's those platforms earn a lot of money from keeping people on their platforms, and they will do everything they can in the power. And there's all sorts in there. We can go into another podcast about the whole Cambridge Analytical stuff that went on and all that jazz. But I think people need to be educated a little bit more about the challenges that these platforms can bring, and not everything you read on there is the truth. And there's a lot of misinformation.
Definitely. And I think there is a place for platforms within certain areas. So, for example, our origin is to give organizations their own platform within that organizational context. And that's really powerful. And so you're culturing that whole sort of sense of purpose and being for that organization's community. And our engagement ratios demonstrate the power of that and how engaging those audiences then become. And we're seeing that with vocL now. We've probably had that live for nearly a year now. And we're going to be launching one with you as well, which will be. And I think again, because there's a real audience that you're building, that's very purposeful and very I think people will want to be part of that for a certain reason. I think so they can exist. I think they can.
It's about that safe space, though, and
It
that's
is
the reason.
safe, that's right.
I think that's the reason we spoke about it. I know that's what vocL was created as well, is to allow people to have that safe space to explore their thinking, and we don't have that on the social platforms.
Yeah, now that's what I like about what you're doing with these platforms. What you've enabled vocL and what you will enable Comms Rebel to do, which is that they're a safe space. And we encourage productive disagreement. We've definitely got a new word here, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
And I think, it just makes it much more interesting, and people are more happy to explore. What we are finding, though, aren't we, on vocL, is people are still a bit hesitant, because people don't want to just put something out there that's not that thought through. I might make a fool of myself here, sort of thing. And actually, I would love people to be more experimental. I mean, I don't know. What's your? How do we get people to be more experimental?
I think the challenge people have is that they it goes back to inclusion and belonging. And when you are faced with and you've got some really quite influential senior leaders in vocL, which is incredible. Yeah. And I can imagine the anticipation or the worry that some of these people have in commenting, because you're like, oh my God, I'm with this individual and they're representing you and they're your sponsors. And if they're talking about you in rooms where you don't have access, you want them to be able to, you believe that you need to be this incredibly polished version of leader so you can be represented in the way you want to be. And I think that's a challenge. I think people just don't have the permission to be able to speak up.
Yeah, that was really fascinating what you were talking about, because, sort of unconsciously, when I write emails to people with something that isn't as thought through as I want to, I always make an effort to write, please criticize this. Yeah. This is just me thinking aloud, and I think probably as leaders, we need to do more of that, don't we? Look, I'm just throwing it out there. Please criticize me, or else, people sit there and sort of say, oh, am I allowed to criticize this? This might be super polished.
Yeah. Or will I get defensive? Or will they get defensive?
Oh, yeah.
Because that happens. And if you have experienced that in your own career, where you may have challenged a leader, or you may have said something that you disagree with, and they've gone, who are you? And I've seen it happen in real life. I've seen it in organizations where a leader has been challenged and they've been shot down straight up. That leader shot that person down. And then you can see the fear in that, and then never hear that person speak up ever again.
Well, not only that person, but that
everybody
then becomes
else.
Cultural. Then no one has a voice. Yeah.
No, I remember that actually. I was at a big leadership conference at Siemens, and it was quite a long time ago. But you remember these moments, and I was not super senior yet, probably my first general manager job, and it was quite a difficult time, and results weren't where and the CEO of the time, not going to mention any names, sort of went up and so any questions from the audience, and then they're quiet at first, and then somebody put their hand up, and he said, well, and it was quite a challenging question, and the CEO said, you obviously have not been listening to anything that I have just been saying. I mean, that is, just a stupid question. I mean, maybe he didn't quite say that. So, I hope that's clear. Any more questions? And it was
nothing.
Sort of, nothing.
Yeah. And what you
it's
just
true.
said,
and I've seen, and I know leaders will do it because they feel attacked and defensive, and they'll be like, oh my, and that's a reaction. It's such a reaction. And then if you don't have somebody in your team to feed that back to you and say, Jürgen, the way you answer that question, we need to kind of manage that next time because you've frightened everybody. And people need to be brave enough to say that to you, because otherwise, if that's the reaction they've seen you, they'll just carry on. And the culture.
And I bet you nobody did that with the CEO. I bet you there wasn't, and it should be, the senior comms person should say, they should, look, that didn't encourage, inclusion and questions.
It's true,
This engaged in conversation is in 2 parts. Keep listening to hear the second part, where we discuss getting to know your team in inclusive environments, creating safe spaces for discussion, and how you can find the courage to speak up in business.